Come, let us explore why ancient monks mastered mudras while you still need apps. Together as a team, let us chant. In these days of technological terrors, we can easily time our meditation using the stopwatch app on our smartphones. In days of yore, however, one might time one's meditation session by burning 1, 2, or 3 sticks of incense one after the other. This method of crease counting, however, was inspired by the techniques practiced by many Bengalis. Those of us living in countries enduring a rise in fascism know that although cranky officials and polyester could confiscate both smartphones and rosaries alike will most always have our hands. And by extension, this means of practice increased counting. Those who have endured disabilities numerous and lifelong are often drawn to the energy work of Taoism as well as Tantric Buddhism. Although they could influence their body's channels, winds and drops, or Nadi Prana Bindu in Sanskrit, all through visualization and invocation. The easiest and most therapeutic method is to use the finger gestures or mudra that are part and parcel of this practice of Bengali crease counting. Beginning with the first pillar over the span of 12 inhalations. Here we go. We could touch the tip of our right thumb to the lowest, middling, and uppermost sets of creases upon its little finger. It could then count likewise upon its ring, middle, and index fingers. Continuing with the second pillar, we could count sets of 12 inhalations, each with our left thumb. To count 4 sets, we could touch the tip of our left thumb to the lowest set of creases upon the little ring, middle, and index fingers of our left hand. This is quite a test of my coordination. Yes, to count 8 sets, we could touch both the lowest and middling sets of creases upon the 4 fingers of our left hand. And even count 12 sets by touching the lowest, middling, and uppermost sets of creases upon the 4 fingers of our left hand. But typically we'll only count the 4 sets of 12 inhalations each. Finishing with the third pillar, we could count 4 collections of 4, 8, or 12 sets upon 12 inhalations each, in a manner that gently, therapeutically, and sustainably influences our channels, winds, and drops. We could rest the great knuckle at the base of our right little finger, upon the tip of our left little finger, palms up in our lap. Doing so could gently invite or real or imagined subtle energies to automatically coalesce in the bladder region of our lower abdomen. I'm going to take a break now from this chanting and turn to our practice manual. Welcome to the first of 5 mindful crease counting meditations. Each time we silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, our sympathetic nervous system supports us in vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, fleetingly noticing mind's antics. Each time we silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, our parasympathetic nervous system supports the physical relaxation and mental release that help us release of that which we noticed during our previous inhalation. Together as a team, let us practice right now. We could rest the. Let's see. Let me make sure my hand is on screen. We could rest the great knuckle at the base of all right ring finger. Upon the tip of our left ring finger, palms up and on lap. Doing so could gently invite a real or imagined subtle energies to automatically coalesce in the navel region of our mid-abdomen. Welcome to the second of 5 mindful crease counting meditations. In harmony with our inhalation and our exhalation, let us passively notice mind's antics and relax into its non-graspable nature. Welcome to this morning's live stream. Please chant with me. We could rest the great knuckle at the base of our right middle finger, upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up and on lap. Doing so could gently invite or real or imagined subtle energies to automatically coalesce in the heart region of our chest. In coordination with our inhalation and our exhalation, we could passively notice mind's antics and relax into its non-graspable nature. Together, let us practice right now, but before we do, allow me to remind you. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist philosophy, or Buddhist meditation, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window. Together as a team, let us practice right now. Sure, one moment, Martin. All right. Good morning, Martin. Martin has asked a very good question. Asked me to expound upon the ideas of mindfulness versus disassociation, as was explored concisely in a short. Happily. Let us consider some of the visual aids splattered across this screen. But before we do, we're going to jump about the text for a moment. Sturgeon's law reminds us that in 90% of everything sex, including human beings, that 90% could look like Yang's religious patriarchy, wherein we are conditioned from childhood to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. The minority, the 10%, through an extreme amount of good fortune, are trained or learn or read that there's a different possibility. The possibility of Yin's spiritual matriarchy. That it's possible to be flexible instead of rigid, loving instead of fearful, rational instead of superstitious, laid back instead of controlling. That it's possible to be egalitarian instead of elitist, lucid instead of cryptic, cooperative instead of competitive, kind instead of cruel. And this has a huge effect on neuroscience. So, when we learn mindfulness and meditation from institutions that are steeped in Yang's religious patriarchy, we are told that we must actively focus and actively analyze, relying upon such discrete mechanisms as those found in the medial as well as dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is a wonderful tool but a terrible tyrant, because once it's overused, it activates or what's the word I'm looking for? Triggers our amygdala, which is the seat of anxiety and aggression. Now, most of us are interested in meditation not because we want to become more anxious or aggressive, but instead because we want to be more peaceful and loving. Fortunately, neither the prefrontal cortex nor the amygdala constitute the entirety of our central nervous system. Enter the autonomic nervous system. Each time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we have evolved to access the sympathetic nervous system ensconced within the middle third of our spinal cord. So this bad boy has evolved to help us to notice in a very special way, to help us to notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, which is the polar opposite of being rigid and concentrated. So a word I've used several times this morning is evolution. So allow me to paint for you a fanciful picture. Ancient hominids have crawled down out of the trees and have ventured onto the plains of what we now would describe as the Serengeti. These are not Homo sapiens sapien. This is much more than 300,000 years ago. But they share a common ancestor with us. And so these hominids, lurching about, occasionally on two legs, are exploring. One, let's say there's three of them. One is completely focused on the splendor of a ladybug on a buttercup. The other is completely zoned out. The third is a twitchy motherfucker. He is keenly aware that there are plenty of animals who would just love to kill him. And at every noise he starts, he notices his windows of perception are wide open. He is seeing vividly, hearing acutely, feeling profoundly, tasting and smelling, completely perceptive. So, of those three hominids, which do you think is more likely to survive an attempted attack by a carnivore? The one focused on a ladybug on a buttercup, the one zoned out, or the one who's just completely vulnerable to his perceptions? Many anthropologists, who are much more learned than myself, would cite the third individual. Our sympathetic nervous system has evolved to notice with that degree of vulnerability. So let's discuss the twofold process of evolution. There's random copying errors made in our DNA. Some are good, some are bad, some are not apparently good or bad for a long time, and some are inert. It is, it is natural selection that determines it. And natural selection simply means this: if an individual lives long enough to do the hibbity-dibbity, to make love, and pass on their genetic material, then those traits have been selected for by natural selection. If one's traits do not facilitate surviving long enough to procreate, then those traits have not been selected for. Now, if you were to say, well, that's crude and inaccurate, you're right. There are many flaws to evolution. But as someone said, a very important biologist said in the 70s, nature only makes sense when seen through the lens of twofold evolution: mutation and selection. That's it. Now, there's all sorts of interesting variations. That's for a different time. So, this apparatus in the middle third of our spinal cord has evolved to keep us alive through sensory acuity. Now, for this sensory acuity to be most effective in a highly dynamic circumstance, it must be vulnerable, passive, visceral, random, and fleeting. The more rigid it is, the less it is going to help with survival. So we talk in terms of mindfulness and meditation because they correlate dynamically with our inhalation and our exhalation. Every time we inhale, we are wired to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice. Mind's antics of perception, sights, sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, including our emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. The whole enchilada. The whole enchilada. However, every time we exhale, we are wired to automatically access the parasympathetic nervous system, which is wired for both physical relaxation as well as mental release of that which we noticed during our previous inhalation. Now, release doesn't mean our brain turns off. Release here refers to transcending our inherent resistance to the presence of what we dread, as well as our resistance to the absence of what we desire, and on an even more subtle level, transcending our resistance to the potential absence of what we dread, stuff running out, as well as subtle resistance to the potential presence of what we dread, something bad might happen. So, by playing with these one-syllable words in harmony with our breathing, we interrupt the pattern of our cerebral cortex actively competing against our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system, and open an opportunity, open space for these guys at long last to cooperate. That's it. So, a fully enlightened Buddha is just an individual who's gotten so good at the Eightfold Path that they practice it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. No human child is born already knowing how to use a commode, or tie their shoes, or brush their teeth, or ride a bicycle. And yet, most human children, by the time they enter first grade, are so good at those activities that they can perform them spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. The Buddha taught that it's possible to master the Eightfold Path in as little as 7 days. So this is not magic. It's simply cooperating with our central nervous system in a deeply therapeutic way. Now, folks who have been sold the bill of goods about being rigid and controlling think, okay, mindfulness is a specific mental state, and I have to contrive that mental state to the exclusion of everything else. And that's very unfortunate. 90% of humans do that generally, 90% of religious folk do that, 90% of Buddhists do that, 90% of Tantrikas do that. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. Which is why luminaries like the Buddha, like Yongjia Xuanzhui, like Prahe Vajra are so rare. Consider, if you will, the dichotomy between the real or the archetypical Gautama and Devadatta. The Buddha, Gautama, is said to have had a foolish cousin, Devadatta. This would describe Devadatta, this would describe the Buddha. The Devadattas are much more common than Buddhas. Buddha wasn't born this way. He was born and indoctrinated to be, just like everybody else. But through many fortuitous things, he saw that that's not going to be satisfying. And that returns also to neuroscience. Neuroscience teaches us that in the basement of our brain, there's not one but two reward systems. The first one is dopamine-oriented, and it rewards for anything that will keep us alive long enough to procreate. It's designed to always drive us forward because, biologically speaking, it's best for individuals to have it's best for men to father children with many women, and it's best for women to mother children from many men, biologically, not sociologically, but biologically. It's good for the gene pool. But there's a second uh, reward system that's oxytocin oriented, and it rewards for cooperations, rewards for stable working relationships, platonic relationships, intimate relationships. And that second one is more fulfilling. Not necessarily more pleasurable, but more fulfilling. So our dopamine-oriented system is the seat of pleasure. The oxytocin-oriented reward system is the seat of satisfaction, and they're different things. Satisfaction and contentment are wonderful because it serves the biological need for consistency. The biological need for pleasure and dissatisfaction is great because it serves the biological need for variety. So when we look at the Four Noble Truths through the lens of biology, we see the Buddha teaching us that there are stressors. That's undeniable. Any man or woman of science will say, yes, there are circumstantial stressors, there are physiological stressors. Any individual who's lived long enough to see their 20s turn into the 30s, turn into the 40s, turn into the 50s, turn into the 60s will say, oh, hell yeah, there are biological stressors. There are interpersonal stressors. There are mental stressors. All of these serve a biological function, regardless of their convenience, regardless of whether they're pleasurable or not. They each serve biological function. However, when we have survival drives, which are wonderful tools, but terrible tyrants, and when our survival mechanisms stop being occasionally used tools and instead become constant tyrants utterly and continually inflicting their will upon our choices and utterances and deeds, then life is deeply, deeply unsatisfying. And that makes perfect sense when seen through the lens of neuroscience. The liberation the Buddha offers us is not liberation from the presence of survival mechanisms, merely their tyranny. So for instance, you want your car to have brakes, but you don't want to drive down the street with one foot on the accelerator and the other on the brake pushing at the same time. That's not good for the car. It's probably not good for your safety either. So the liberation Buddha offers us is liberation from the tyranny of survival tools morphed into survival tyrants. The means by which the Buddha taught this, is simply the Eightfold Path. And the first six folds of the Eightfold Path are generated spontaneously, simply through a practice of mindfulness and meditation, which is crazy, but effective. It works. And this is inferred in the Anapanasati Sutta on the mindfulness with breathing discourse and the discourse upon the 7 enlightenment factors. So this is not something new that was invented in the Swat Valley. No, this is what the Buddha taught from the get-go. But sadly, it has been obscured by religious patriarchy, usually not maliciously, often with the best of intentions, as was lamented by Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching. People who do the most harm are seldom the most ill-intended. They just have really terrible strategies for implementing what they think is going to be good. Now, there are going to be some proper villains, but not everyone who does something foolish is malicious. So, let's tie this up in a big red bow. the more we cooperate sustainably with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, the more we stimulate our anterior cingulate gyrus, the seat of empathy. And so this, the seat of mindfulness, this, the seat of meditation, and this, the seat of empathy, together would be described by the ancients as our Buddha nature. So every neurologically healthy human being is wired to not only practice the Eightfold Path, but master it. We do that not through the path of contrivance, but through cooperation. Cooperation internally with the mechanisms of our central nervous system, cooperation externally. I hope this has made a little bit of sense. So now, let's chant. We could rest all four knuckles of our right hand upon the tips of all fingers of our, upon the tips of all four of our left finger palms up in our lap. That's kind of obscure. Let me show you again on the larger camera. Right hand, four knuckles. Just setting them here, flipping it over like a veggie burger on the grill, palms up in our lap. Oh, like a pancake in the grill. That would have been a better simile. Okay, so let's tap button 9. And I'm going to tap this document. All right, in coordination with our inhalation and our exhalation, as we silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, we are wired to vulnerably notice mind's antics. As we silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, we are similarly wired to physically relax and mentally release that which we noticed during our previous inhalation. Together as a team, let us practice right now. We now finish up what was supposed to be our opening chant, which is typically our opening chant, um, 12 out of 13 times. But for this lesson, it has to be dovetailed. Okay, so quick like a Benny. Please chant with me. We could rest the great knuckle at the base of our right index finger. Upon the tip of our left index finger, palms up in our lap. Doing so could gently invite our real or subtle energies to automatically coalesce at the crown region of our head. Together. Although these actions might not bestow upon us the miraculous actions of a Tolkien fever dream, they could assist our bodies practice of Buddha's mindfulness and meditation. Welcome to the 5th of 5 mindful crease counting meditations. So, this is by way of review. It's going to be concise. If there's anything I leave out that you find confusion, whose absence you find confusing, don't be shy. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist philosophy, or Buddhist meditation, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window. So here we go. Let us answer the musical question, what is the most efficient way to practice mindfulness and meditation? Because we're busy folks, we've got stuff to do. Each time we silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, our sympathetic nervous system is wired to help us vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice mind's antics of perception, emotion, intention, cognition, recollection, and imagination. We could notice the external, the internal, the physical, the mental, the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, or the grotesque. What do we do with that which we notice? Each time we silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, our parasympathetic nervous system is wired to support the physical relaxation as well as mental release that help us, or I should say release, of that which we noticed during our previous inhalation. Release, of course, not meaning shoving away. Release just means we take a relaxing break from the exhausting effort of living in perpetual resistance. So, together as a team, let us practice right now. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 8 3/4 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.